Good morning. How are you? And hope you are having a great day. So, one of the fascinating things in this week's Torah portion that I wanted to speak about really has a tremendous impact on our life and the way we think and the way we interact with others. So Moses was the greatest leader of the Jewish people. He impacted so many, and finally in this week's Torah portion he turns to God and he says, "Hey God, enough already." He says, "I can't do it all on my own, I need help." And God tells him to anoint 70 appointed elders who will become part of the Jewish people, who will become leaders just like Moses and be able to inspire the Jewish people. And Moses confers the wisdom on these 70 people, and then something happens. We all know Joshua. Joshua was the greatest disciple of Moshe, and he was very close to Moshe. And Joshua comes running to Moshe. He says, "Moses, there's a problem here." He says, "There's two people who are still in the tent. They weren't anointed as the 70 elders, and they're giving prophecy. Moses, stop them, stop them." And Moshe turns to Joshua in some of the most inspiring words we've ever heard. And he says, "Joshua, are you jealous for me? I wish that God would make all of these people prophets and let the Spirit of Hashem dwell on everyone. Why are you jealous for me?" Rashi says, what was Joshua so worried about? He says that these two people, Eldad and Medad, were sitting in the tent and they were prophesying that Moses is going to die and that Joshua is going to become the next leader. Imagine, 38 years before God tells Moses that he's not going into Egypt, these two people were already prophesying it. Now we can understand why Joshua was so concerned. Joshua was the closest disciple. He was devastated. He didn't know where to bury himself. What's going on here? But what's Moses' answer? How does Moses calm him down? By saying, "Are you jealous for me? I wish God would make everyone prophets and let rest the Spirit on them." What's the answer of Moses to Joshua? But to understand this, we really have to understand something else in the beginning of this week's Torah portion. The beginning of this week's Torah portion speaks about kindling the menorah. But the words it uses is bahalotcha, when you let the flame go up, when you let the flame rise. Now, anyone here light Shabbos candles or lit menorah on Hanukkah, you know the word to kindle is lahadlik. So why does he use the word bahalotcha? To raise, what does that mean? So Rashi right away says, hey, you know what he means? When Aaron went to light the menorah, Aaron had to make sure that he didn't just kindle it, but he had to keep the flame on it till it would rise on its own. So the candle wouldn't just go out. Well, that's obvious. Of course, if you're going to just light it without making sure it's strong enough to go on its own, then you'll have to be there the whole time. So what's the genius of this? Why does he use the word ba'aloscha? I want to tell you a thought and a discussion that Rebbe had in 1991, 29 years ago, at the last portion of Balotcha gathering that the Rebbe had before he became sick. And the Rebbe said that in order to understand this, you have to understand the spiritual significance there. You see, what does it mean to kindle, and why does he tell us to kindle? The Rebbe says there's two types of ways you could light and kindle something. One is where you light something and you hold the candle to it, and the other one is where you light something and you let it rise and raise on its own. It's the difference between power and influence. Two types of ways we interact with other people. Sometimes it's confused because, after all, people who have power usually have influence, and people who have influence have some types of power, but really they're very, very different. Because power works by division, and influence works by multiplication. Let me give you an example. If you have a company, Elon Musk owns Tesla, and let's say he owned 100% of Tesla, but he needs cash. So he brings in 9 investors. So now he only has 10% influence. He lost 90% of his influence because power works by division. But what happens with influence? Influence is different. Imagine if you had an idea to change the world, and then you brought in 10 other people and you inspired them with the same, you influenced them with the same idea. Then now you don't have less influence. You have more influence. Because now there's not just one person that's excited to do this, but there's 10 of them. It's like the difference between a CEO and a teacher or a mentor or an educator. Your CEO, the boss of your company, has power over you. He decides what size office you have. He decides what your salary might be, when your vacations might be, what you might do for the company. Tremendous power over you. An educator, a mentor doesn't have power over you. He doesn't tell you what to do and how to do, but he influences you. He inspires you and impacts your life in the greatest way. In the ancient days, it was the difference of kings and prophets. You had kings. The kings could kill. The kings could go to war. The kings could put you into jail. The kings could decide how much taxes you had. They levied on you, etc., etc. But then there were prophets. Prophets had no power over you. The prophets came and they said the word of God. They spoke the word of Hashem. They had no power. They couldn't put taxes on you. They couldn't go to war. They had no jails. They had no guns. They had no armies. Yet when you think about the prophets till today, you think about Elijah's prophecy and screaming against corruption. You think about Amos's cry for social justice. You think about Isaiah's vision of the end of days. Until today, when you read Isaiah, Elijah, or Amos, you could still be inspired, although they're not here. Never mind, they're in power back then. They're still not here. Tell me, which king do we get inspired by today? By Achav? By Yerovam? But when you think about Habakkuk, Elijah, Samuel, till today, these are the people that inspire us. Because that's the difference between influence and power. To paraphrase the words Shakespeare used, he says, the influence we have lives after us. The power is interred with our bones. A CEO, a king, the moment they die, they're finished. Who's thinking about them? Who's scared of them? They're done. They passed away. But think about an author. You ever know these authors who wrote books and during their lifetime no one really read their books? But suddenly they pass away and their influence grows and suddenly people are reading them and inspired by them. If you have power, once you die, you're gone. But if you have influence, then it's a whole different ballgame. You know the old joke they say about this father who died and he had 3 kids. And he was a super wealthy man and he really impacted them. And at the funeral, the first kid comes and says, you know, Dad, you impacted me so much. You changed my life. Here, he says, I'm putting in $1 million cash. I'm throwing it into your grave. And the next kid says, Dad, you know what you did for me? You know, you changed my life. And he takes $2 million and he throws it in. And then the third kid comes and says, Dad, that's a big deal what they did. You know how much influence you had over me? He says, you were the best father ever. And he takes a check and he writes out a check for $10 million and he drops it into the grave and he takes the cash out. So when you have power, once your power is gone, you can't even cash a check. But when you have influence, your influence lasts forever. And that's the message that the Torah tells us with Bahalot Chet Hanero. The Torah is telling you that when you inspire someone, you shouldn't inspire someone by power. We have to constantly have the flame that stays over you. But you should inspire by raising them, by influencing them, by inspiring them, by making a difference in their life with an idea, with a vision. I have a question for you. Think about 2 questions. Think about the 3 people who had the most influence on you in your life. If it was a parent, if it was a teacher, if it was a professor at school, if it was a mentor in the hospital. Think about the 3 most important people who influence your life. Not had power over you, but influence your life. Tell me, do they know that they were the people that influenced your life most? Did you tell them ever? And if not, why not? And secondly, I have another question for you. Do you lead by influence or by power? With your children. You have children. How do you raise your children? Are they scared of you because you have power over them? Because you're going to tell them what they could do or what they can do? Or do you influence them? You inspire them to do the right thing? Because, let me tell you, at some point your kid's going to grow up and your power will wane. Today in society, by 6 years old, they grow up and you can't tell them what to do anymore. So what are you going to do? If you inspire them, you influence them, so that even when they're older, even when they're bigger than you, even when you can't give them allowance, when they make more money than you, your influence will stay. But if you only have power over them, the moment they grow up, the power is gone. Of course, parents need to set limitations. In order to be able to influence, there has to be rules. But you're leading at work, with your coworkers, with the people that work for you, with the people in the hospital that you might teach, or your professor at school. Remember, you need to influence them, not have power over them. And that's really the message of what happened with Moses and Joshua. Joshua came screaming to Moses and he says, Moses, they're prophesying that you're going to die. Stop them now. How could this happen? How could you die? And Moses says, and looks at him, he says, are you jealous of me? Are you kidding me? Do you think I could die? I can't die, because it's not about power. It's about my influence. I wish that God should make everyone prophets and rest the spirit on them. Moshe is telling Joshua something much deeper. He's saying, Joshua, what are you worried? That my influence will wane? My influence will never wane, because at the end of the day, I lead by influence. I lead by inspiration. And therefore, even if I pass and you have to take the Jews into Israel, my influence will continue. My inspiration will continue. You have to raise the flame. When you kindle someone's soul, when you inspire someone, it can't be by always holding it to him with power, but by raising it. You know, in 2 weeks is the Rebbe's yahrzeit. And I think about the Rebbe. The Rebbe didn't own any property. Even his own home he didn't own. All the thousands of institutions of Chabad all over the world, none of them were owned by the Rebbe. The Rebbe lived in a small room. Yet look at his influence. 25 years after he passed away. 26 years almost. And there's tens of thousands of Menachem Mendels running around. There's thousands of Chabad centers. And so many people that have been inspired by his influence to become leaders themselves and to change the world. And that's the profound message that the Rebbe said in 1991 when he taught this. He says, listen to the story of Moses and Joshua. Listen to Joshua's fright because someone was prophesying that Moses will die. And Moses' deepest explanation to him that I can't die because it's an idea. I can't die because it's inspiration, it's not power. Because just like we remember Elijah's cry for justice, against corruption, and Amos's cry for social justice, and Isaiah's vision for the end of days, Moses' ideas live on forever. And I think we look at the crisis today in America, what's going on, and we all think that we could use our power, exert our power to make change. But the truth is, the real way you make change is through influence. The greatest revolutions have been through influence. Have a great day.